everything would shift. It's like when you look at one of those things for a while and all of a sudden it goes like, it's art. It's performance art. I was like, whoa.
There's two things that are really funny about it that are very hard to do in a comedy routine. One, here I come to save the day. But he's also funny while he's waiting.
The audacity he had to burn up stage time, drinking a glass of water, listening to a Victrola. He didn't care about boring or making the audience uncomfortable. In fact, I think he really relished taking us prisoner.
Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is another episode of Westdoc Online. And this is a very special episode, which you're going to find out about in just a second. I want to remind you first, we're brought to you in part by Real Screen Magazine, Real Screen Summit. Go to our webpage at westdoc.net, scroll down to the bottom. There's an icon there you can click on and get all the information about Real Screen and their latest events. Today we have a filmmaker that I didn't really have to do all that much research on, although I did go on IMDb Pro just to remind myself of some of the credits, which include the recent Netflix special, The Future with Bill Gates. He was the producer of the Stanford Prison Experiment on Hulu, Waffle and Mochi on Netflix, Diagnosis on Netflix, Mind of a Chef, Vice, First 48, Hopkins. You get the idea. This young man seems like he's been working for a long time, and he has. And I know him very well because he's my son, Alex Braverman. Hey, Alex, how are you?
Quite well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well, it is special and it is fun to have you on the show and talking about your new feature that you're the producer of director of called Thank You Very Much. Why don't you tell us, let's pretend we don't know anything about it and give us a little intro to the film.
Okay. Well, it's a 99-minute feature documentary about Andy Kaufman. And sometimes when you tell people that you're making a film or a documentary film about Andy Kaufman, their first response can be, well, why would you make another documentary about Andy Kaufman? Hasn't that been done? And the answer is no. There's, of course, Man on the Moon, which is an incredible scripted biopic, Milos Forman, and then Jim and Andy, which is, about Jim Carrey becoming Andy Kaufman for Man on the Moon. And then there's I'm From Hollywood, which was made by Lynn Margulies, which is sort of about Andy's wrestling career. But I just felt like there hadn't been, or that there wasn't, rather, a comprehensive, definitive feature look at his life and career and pulling all these things into one film. And I very badly wanted to be the person to attempt to put that together. And it only took 8.5 years.
I mean, this is kind of a loaded question, but I'm not 100% sure of the answer. But how did you get turned on to Andy Kaufman?
I think you know the answer to that. But, well, I grew up, in a family where my parents, you being one of them, worked together quite a bit before I was born and as when I was a young kid. And I feel like there were a lot of beta tapes on the wall in shelves that looked similar to the ones behind you, where some of the tapes were appropriate for a young kid to watch and others were inappropriate maybe for a young kid to watch. And one of the ones that you guys had worked on together that I feel like I was allowed to see when I was younger was Andy Kaufman Plays Carnegie Hall. And not only was I just really into the performance itself and what the other clips of his that I could see at the time, which, accessible to me were probably some Saturday Night Live clips and other things like that. But just the lore that surrounded Andy was particularly eye-opening or exciting for a kid to hear about, just because, even if I'm not going to a lot of big shows as a kid, I know that shows take place in theaters with seats and you need a ticket. And so just the idea that I think that the milk and cookies story, where he, takes the entire audience out to milk and cookies after the show.
The whole restaurant on the bus now. Milk and cookies. That was beautiful. I love it. Tomorrow, the show will be continuing. At the end of the sideshow, we won't go to bed tonight. And the show will continue tomorrow at 1 o'clock at the Staten Island Ferry. All right.
This idea that the show can go on outside the venue and that you don't need a traditional setting for a performer to do some of his, best work. Like, that to me was really inspiring. And then of course also as a kid, it was crazy to hear stuff about how, like, he would work as a busboy at Jerry's Deli, like, while he was a TV star. And so I don't know, just seeing those early performances and then hearing a lot of the lore, he's just someone that even as a kid I thought was cool and boundary pushing in a way that was fun and never really got old.
Let's take a look at the trailer.
I've never told a joke in my life.
What is he doing? Why is he doing it?
What I'd like to do for you right now, it's called eating ice cream.
That's my pal. It's just as much torture if you're cutting them with a razor blade.
Wait, can you turn...
What kind of parental damage was done to this boy?
I guess I'm what you call maybe a passionate man.
Always been attracted to bad boys.
Get lost, baby. I beat you.
Holy
This is not even weird.
Women's lib was exploding.
Oh, Andy, please, no, don't do
Giving women an equal chance.
I think it's a stupid little wimp.
You're performing for an audience that doesn't know it's watching a show.
I just thought he was misguided.
He was just having fun.
what the
Finished?
Yeah, that's the shit off the camera.
Really relished taking us prisoner.
Why?
I didn't ask you.
Am I supposed to laugh at that?
Milk and cookies.
I think that was genius, actually.
I don't have any money.
Ladies and gentlemen, so far everything I have done for you tonight, really I am only fooling. This is really me. And everything else was just a character.
Here's a mirror. And people didn't like what they saw a lot of the time.
I would still like to know who the real Andy is.
Why did it take 8.5 years to make this film, do you think?
If you don't count the amount of time that was just strictly raising money, and you only really count the time where you're shooting interviews and editing and that's it. I think it probably took closer to a year and 3/4. That's how long production and post-production took. I started out the conversation saying that there had been a perception that this had been done already, whether that's true or not. And so I think a great amount of time and effort went into sort of combating that perception, or finding people that wanted to be a part of this, that understood that there was still an opportunity to do something here that hadn't really been done. And then the other part of it is just that I think it's hard to get anything made and done sometimes, and it's just a matter of what's the expression? It's like a war of attrition. Is that is that the right expression? I think you just have to push and push and push and push, and I'm still pushing as we're now trying to release the film, and you just can't give up. There were a lot of times where this felt very dead, and you just can't give up. You have to keep going.
Well, I think, as I remember it, I think the two of us tried to do something together maybe 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and we were not successful, right? And then you kind of took the mantle and surprised me one day and said, "Hey, I think we're going ahead with this." I mean, do you want to talk about that process and how you raised the money to make this?
Sure. Well, the initial seed of the project was just acknowledging that this was a project that didn't exist and that should exist, and we got in touch with Bob Zamuda and went up to his house in Lake Tahoe with some outside development money, which we put towards putting Bob on camera, putting Lynn on camera, and cutting together some, hiring an archival producer for a few weeks, and culling what we could find that was out there and putting together a sizzle. And while we were in Lake Tahoe, while we were filming with Bob, he kind of casually mentioned that that Vice had been there the week before, which turns out to have been the Jim and Andy film. And I think, it took maybe a year or a year and a half from then for that film to come out. But in the year and a half that we're waiting for that film to come out, and the rumors about it are sort of bubbling up, I think everyone kind of was hesitant to invest in our film because they didn't know what that was going to be. And I think once it came out, that it was clear that it was a film about Jim Carrey and his process, but there was definitely a fear amongst potential investors of like, well, we don't want to put more money into a Andy Kaufman documentary. But so we were sitting on this great material for at least a year and a half, and then at a certain point linked up with Josh and Benny Safdie, and we were working with one of their producers at the time, Oscar Boyson, and we went out and pitched this, and everyone really, really loved the pitch and the sizzle and the deck and the concept, but it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right fit for a lot of these places for various reasons that were all different place to place. And at that point, when you've pitched everyone in the world, it feels, or at least you think you have, it feels like a loss. It feels like the project's probably dead. But I also have seen in the past, as I'm sure you have a million times as well, like the climate changes, the environment changes, the appetite for certain types of projects change. And so I, kept it warm, and I kept the relationship with Lynn and Bob warm, and continued some at times to communicate with the Safdies. And it really, now we're like fast forwarding from 2017, which is when we did those initial interviews, to 2021, when we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm not working a ton because I'm not out there shooting. The projects are slow, and I took a job that I might normally not have taken, which was to write a deck for a unscripted sports series, which I'm not really a writer. I'm not hugely into sports, and I don't write a lot of decks, period. but I worked on this project for 6 weeks or so for Wavelength, which was a New York-based financier studio production company. And at the end, when I turned it in, they were really happy with the work and basically said, you know, like, this is great. Like, what else do you want to do? We should work on some things together. And I was like, well, everyone in the world has passed on the one thing that I want to do, but here it is. Take a look. And sent them the material that we had pitched and unsuccessfully, I don't know what I'm trying to say. We had pitched and everyone passed. And they looked at it and they're like, this is great. Let's do it. We'll pay for this. And it was just like, I don't even know that they understood how meaningful and life-changing just that type of instinct was. But just to briefly digress for a second, like, this is just the perfect kind of example for why sometimes you should just say yes to things that you might not think you're a great fit for or don't have a ton of experience for. But like, I would, you know, this film wouldn't exist if I hadn't written deck for them for an unscripted sports series. Anyway, that's where the money finally clicked into place. This is late 2021. We went back to Josh and Benny at that point, went back to Josh and Benny at that point. They're interested. Wavelength had been a co-producer on Won't You Be My Neighbor, so they had a relationship with Morgan Neville and Tremolo, and Morgan was interested in being a producer as well. And so then all these different entities came together and formed one team to make this film. And it was just, what, even as it was happening, I was like, I can't believe this is happening, because I thought this was so dead. And I was so heartbroken about it for so many years, and just so to see that come together, and there wasn't really a catch. It was incredible.
Can you go back, for those who don't know, do you want to explain who Bob Zmuda and Lynn are? You just mentioned them casually.
Yeah, so Bob Zmuda was Andy's good friend, best friend, writing partner, collaborator, producer. They worked together for around 10 years, I think, roughly like 9 years, 1975-ish or 1974-ish to 1984. I think he was just someone that they would bounce ideas off of each other. They would have adventures together. They would come up with premises for specials and things like that. And since 1984, you know, in Andy's absence, Bob has been the keeper of the Kaufman legend to a great extent. You know, he has had a career since then and has gone on to create and produce Comic Relief and other projects as well. But ultimately, he's Andy Kaufman's writing partner and friend. And Lynn Margulies was Andy's girlfriend the last few years of his life.
I think a lot of people got it, but a lot of people didn't get it at all. They hated his guts.
Also, in her own way, a collaborator as well. And she went on to make I'm From Hollywood after Andy's death, or alleged death, however you want to call it. But the reason that she did that is because they were planning on making that film together. And, you know, as he was ill, he basically said, I need you to finish this. But yeah, she's a filmmaker, editor, camera person, and best known as his girlfriend. And in Man on the Moon, Bob Zmuda is portrayed by Paul Giamatti, and Courtney Love plays Lynn Margulies.
Here's a tough question, and maybe there's no right or wrong answer, but looking back, what would you do differently now if you were making this again over the...
It's in the shape that it's in, that it exists, that it's going to have an audience soon. And so I don't really even want to Back to the Future 2, the whole situation by changing anything that was done. I think, so I wouldn't change anything.
It's a few days before the film opens theatrically in several dozen theaters across the country. It also will be on video on demand on all the usual suspects. So you can watch this on, I'm sure Amazon Prime and probably Apple TV Plus and all the other VOD suspects. Here's a question: what would you say if you were speaking to students of documentary and young up and coming filmmakers about getting into the documentary world and in relation to the making of this film and filmmaking in general?
You have to be fairly certain that your subject matter or story is something that you could not easily become sick of. Just because the amount of time that you spend on certain types of documentary projects anyway, in the field with people, can be challenging. It can test your patience. I think the post process, you have to really be in love with the material and the story and the footage and the subjects, because you're going to be with them all day, every day. And then even after the fact, as you're trying to get the film out there, you're still immersed in the ideas and the themes, and you have to be excited to discuss them with anyone that is willing to talk to you about them. And so a question that comes up sometimes is, or it came up a lot for me before I made the film, but it was, when are you going to do your own thing? Because I spent so many years as a hired gun, more or less, working on other people's projects. And it wasn't for a lack of wanting to do my own thing, but you really have to find the thing that you can devote all of your energy and effort to, not knowing that it'll work out. And I feel like this project is one of the first ideas that I had that I knew that I could stick with regardless of what happened. But yeah, that's the key, is like some people have millions of ideas and they can't sit still and they just want to do all of them. But for me, it's it takes a lot for me to really be in love with an idea and pursue it at all costs. And so I would say for anyone out there that has an idea for something, you just got to make sure you're really into it and that you're going to stick with it.
What was the participation of the Safdie brothers and Morgan Neville?
Overall, I would say when you're working on any kind of project and you sort of look around at who your EPs are, like their value is different depending on who they are and what their experiences have been and what kind of personalities they have. But in the case of Safdie brothers and Morgan, like, these are people who I was and am and will be huge fans of. Their work is just incredible, singular. Like, they're people that you can tell when you're in their hands watching any of their films. And so and I felt like they, even though they're not similar, Safdie's over here and Morgan over here, like, they both kind of fit for this project in a way, in my opinion, individually and when you put their sensibilities together. Because on the one hand, Josh and Benny have made a lot of projects, both feature length and shorts and experimental and documentary, that are sort of about characters and people and worlds that sort of like blend and challenge your notion of what's real and what's fiction, what's nonfiction. Like, looking at Uncut Gems as an example, they've got Kevin Garnett as an actor in there playing himself sort of in the context of these real games that he had been a part of years earlier, but now he's playing a fictionalized version of himself off the court, and so you're kind of wondering like what's real, what's not. Benny had, I wouldn't call it a career, but a phase of his creative life where he was doing stand-up comedy as a character. I think his name was Ralph Handel or something like that. And then they also did a bunch of experimental shorts, where they're sort of like staging these events on the street and getting real people's reactions, which is something that Bob and Andy did, not on camera a lot of the time, but just for fun. And so I think that their mindset and their vision and their sensibility is similar. And then Morgan, separately, is someone who is pretty legendary for his ability to like distill and capture and communicate the lives and careers of like these incredible public figures, most often performers, musicians, actors, well-known people. And he's just like a sensational portrait artist, and such a good storyteller. And he's also very creative. So it was a perfect fusion, I would say, of their backgrounds and sensibilities. But then working with them, I'm physically inside Morgan's office building in a room. So I have, throughout production and post-production, pretty near constant access to him, and including, weekly or bi-weekly, I don't remember, meetings with him where we're sort of like spitballing different ideas, people to talk to. We're looking at footage, we're looking at cuts. With Elara, which is the Safdie's company, not only is it Josh and Benny, but it's also Ronald Bronstein, who's a guy that they work with, who's one of their writers and editors and an incredible director of his own films too. Like, we're doing the same thing, but just over the phone and over Zoom. And they're really great at looking at cuts and sort of saying, like, this is great, but you're kind of missing the point here. You should look at this, or what, wouldn't it be cool if you tried this? And so everyone was just very creative and collaborative and cool. And I don't know, I'll probably never get that lucky again. It was insane.
I love you, and I'm very proud of you, Alex. Thank you for doing this recording. I hope the film is well received and successful and will lead to a bunch of other fabulous projects for you. And I look forward to seeing them and hopefully maybe having you even on the show again. Love you, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Ellie, what does the dog say? What does the dog say? You did it earlier.